St. Vincent de Paul was born on April 24, 1581, in Pouilly, a small village in the south of France, into a simple and deeply religious peasant family. From an early age, he experienced the humble life of the countryside, helping his parents with farm work, tending animals, and taking part in family tasks. Despite the simplicity, his family had the habit of praying in community and attending Sunday Mass, instilling in Vincent a love for the Catholic faith. These early experiences marked his soul and shaped the foundation of his future vocation to the priesthood. During his childhood, Vincent showed great intelligence and an aptitude for learning, standing out in the small local school. His parents, perceiving his ability, decided to invest in his education, believing that study could be a path to social and spiritual advancement. This support was fundamental for him to be able to enter institutions that would open greater doors for him in the future. The boy Vincent, though humble, nurtured from early on the desire to help others, something that would become central in his adult life. Vincent's youth was marked by a formation that united study, discipline, and spirituality. In his adolescence, he began to study in religious colleges, where he learned not only the basic sciences, but also theology, philosophy, and Latin, which were indispensable for those who wished to follow ecclesiastical life. He himself initially nurtured the hope of finding financial stability and being able to help his family, and not so much the desire for a life of sacrifice. However, God had other plans for him. At 19 years old, Vincent was already sufficiently prepared to begin his priestly formation. In 1600, he was ordained a priest at just 19, a remarkable feat for someone of peasant origin. Although he had achieved this goal, his heart still sought material security, and so he accepted ecclesiastical positions that would guarantee him an income. This initial phase shows how his vocation went through a process of purification until his faith and mission reached true depth. Shortly after being ordained, Vincent went through experiences that would transform his vision of the priestly life. He was captured by Turkish pirates during a voyage and taken as a slave to Tunisia. He remained in captivity for about 2 years, suffering humiliations and privations until he managed to return to France. This experience of suffering helped him to understand up close the pain of the poorest and the forgotten, planting in his heart an even greater love for those in need. After his return, Vincent worked as a chaplain and tutor in noble households. In these roles, he lived closely with the French high society, where he perceived the enormous distance between rich and poor. Although he was surrounded by luxury and power, his heart was troubled by the misery of the people he saw in the streets. This coexistence would become a call to personal conversion, for he realized that he could not live only for himself, but should spend his life in favor of the most humble. Contact with spiritual figures of his time was also decisive. In Paris, Vincent met Cardinal Pierre de Bérulle, who introduced him to a deeper path of priestly spirituality. Bérulle helped Vincent to understand the true meaning of vocation, to be a shepherd at the service of God's people and not just someone in search of personal benefits. This encounter was a watershed in his life, leading him to embrace poverty and service more and more. Little by little, Vincent came to perceive that God was calling him to something greater. He could not limit himself to a comfortable life among the nobles, but should turn his gaze to those who suffered. Thus, he began to get involved in works of charity, visiting the sick, supporting needy families, and consoling the afflicted. His heart, once inclined toward the desire for stability, began to be transformed by compassion and living faith in Christ. The young priest, marked by his experiences of suffering, found in the gospel the inspiration to give a new direction to his life. The phrase of Jesus, "Whatever you did to one of these little ones, you did to me," Matthew 25:40, began to guide his choices. He understood that his vocation could not be reduced to the altar, but should expand into concrete works of mercy. This understanding would be the basis for all his future work. Thus, the youth of St. Vincent de Paul was a providential school of human and spiritual experiences. From the poverty of the countryside, he learned simplicity and faith. From slavery, he learned the pain of the marginalized. From contact with the nobles, he perceived social injustice, and from meeting spiritual masters, he understood the greatness of the true priestly vocation. All this prepared the ground for him to become the great apostle of charity whom we know today. After his ordination and first experiences, Vincent de Paul was still seeking a path that would guarantee him security and stability, but Providence was leading him to something greater. The encounter with the poor was the first decisive step toward his true inner conversion. He began to perceive that Christ was present in a special way in those in need, and that the priesthood only made sense when exercised as a service of love. This awareness grew in his heart until it became his principal mission. One of the most striking episodes of this phase occurred when he was called to hear the confession of a sick and abandoned peasant. In that encounter, Vincent realized the lack of spiritual and material assistance offered to simple people of the countryside. Many lived and died without even receiving the sacraments or a word of consolation. This reality touched him deeply, awakening in him the desire to found missions to evangelize and serve the poor, both materially and spiritually. Another decisive moment was his contact with the Countess of Gondi, a deeply religious woman of the French high society. She invited him to be the chaplain of her family and to accompany her works of charity. It was with her that Vincent came to know the misery of the peasants who worked on the lands of the nobility. The Countess encouraged Vincent to preach popular missions, to instruct and hear the confessions of the poor of the countryside. Thus, he began to structure a pastoral ministry specifically oriented to the spiritual and social needs of the people. The experience of the missions revealed to Vincent the great spiritual hunger of simple people. Many times, they did not even know the basic prayers of the Christian faith and were far from the sacraments. Vincent perceived that it was necessary to form well-prepared priests to attend to these people. It was then that the inspiration arose to create seminaries and training centers so that priests would truly be shepherds close to their sheep and not merely functionaries of an institution. This concern for the clergy would become one of the pillars of his life. From these experiences, Vincent began to radically transform his way of living the priesthood. He stopped seeking privileges or financial security and began to give himself totally to the service of those in need. His life was marked by simplicity, detachment, and self-giving. He no longer sought honors, but rather the glory of God manifested in care for the poor. This process of conversion was slow but profound, shaping his soul according to the divine designs. Contact with spiritual figures such as St. Francis de Sales also helped him consolidate this vision. Francis de Sales was known for his gentleness and practical spirituality, and he influenced Vincent to seek a path of humility and service. This friendship contributed to Vincent's maturing in faith and to his courageous assumption of the mission God entrusted to him. The witness of contemporary saints reinforced in him the conviction that holiness is lived in the practice of charity. Over time, Vincent realized that charity could not be improvised, but needed to be organized. The misery was great, and the help had to be constant and structured. It was in this context that the first initiatives were born, which would later give rise to great works and congregations. He understood that it was necessary to unite forces, involving lay people and religious men and women, to create a solid network of support for the poor. This principle would become a hallmark of his mission. Care for the poor was not limited to material needs, but also spiritual. Vincent insisted that it was necessary to evangelize, to bring the sacraments, and to instruct in the faith. He said that feeding the body without caring for the soul was incomplete. For this reason, his missions united the distribution of food, clothing, and medicine with catechesis, confessions, and the celebration of Mass. He believed that only thus could a true transformation of life be built. At the same time, Vincent began to perceive that charity should be lived in a communal, not individualistic way. He encouraged the faithful to organize themselves into confraternities, prayer groups, and works of assistance so that everyone could participate. This participatory model gave rise to a network of charity that would spread throughout France and later across the whole world. Vincent understood that the Church needed to be a supportive family in which each member cared for the other. Thus, the conversion of Saint Vincent de Paul was not only an interior change, but a transformation that bore concrete fruits. From the young priest in search of stability arose the apostle of charity who consecrated his life to the poorest. His example shows that God uses human experiences, even the most difficult, to shape the hearts of his servants and make them instruments of love and mercy. The desire to bring the gospel to the poor and to form better prepared priests led St. Vincent de Paul to found in 1625 the Congregation of the Mission, also known as the Lazarist Fathers or Vincentians. The congregation had as its principal objective the carrying out of popular missions among peasants and the offering of solid formation to the clergy. It was a revolutionary initiative for its time, for it responded to two great needs: the evangelization of the poor and the renewal of the priesthood. The Congregation of the Mission was officially born with the support of the Countess of Gondi and her husband, who financed the first initiatives. Vincent gathered a group of priests willing to live in community with simplicity and a missionary spirit. They committed themselves to preaching, hearing confessions, catechizing, and attending spiritually to the most abandoned. It was not merely a matter of giving alms, but of offering a constant and effective pastoral presence. One of the central points of the congregation was community life. The Vincentian priests were to live together, sharing their goods and their mission. Vincent believed that fraternal communion strengthened pastoral work and bore witness to the world. Thus, the congregation became a model of evangelical life, uniting prayer, study, and service. The communal spirit was seen as a reflection of the very gospel lived in its essence. The popular missions organized by the Vincentians quickly spread throughout France. The priests went from village to village, remaining entire weeks in each place. During that time, they preached sermons, offered confessions, celebrated masses, taught prayers, and carried out works of charity. Many communities experienced true conversions and spiritual renewals as a result of these missions. It was intense work, but profoundly fruitful. In addition to the missions, the Congregation of the Mission dedicated itself to the formation of the clergy. Vincent founded seminaries to prepare future priests, offering them quality spiritual, intellectual, and pastoral formation. At that time, many priests were ordained without proper preparation, which compromised the life of the Church. Vincent's initiative helped raise the level of the French clergy and contributed to the Catholic reform in his country. Vincent insisted that missionaries should unite simple preaching with practical charity. He said that it was not enough to speak of God, it was necessary to show divine love in concrete actions. For this reason, the Vincentians became known as men who not only evangelized, but also cared for the sick, fed the hungry, and consoled the afflicted. This union of faith and charity became the congregation's hallmark. Another important aspect was the vow of stability made by the members of the congregation. This vow expressed the commitment to remain their whole life at the service of the poor and of the missions. It was not merely a temporary promise, but a definitive consecration. This vow gave the Vincentians great stability and fidelity in their mission, guaranteeing the continuity of Vincent's charism throughout the centuries. The congregation also took on hospitals, prisons, and institutions of assistance. Vincent understood that charity needed to extend to every environment where there was suffering. The Vincentian priests became a presence of hope in places of abandonment, bringing not only material help, but also the light of faith. They showed that the Church's mission is not limited to the walls of temples, but must reach every place in society. The growth of the congregation of the mission was rapid, and soon it spread beyond France. Vincentian missionaries were sent to other countries, bringing with them the spirit of service and charity. Thus, Vincent's work crossed borders and became a true movement of worldwide evangelization. This expansion shows the strength of the Vincentian charism and its relevance in every age. With the foundation of the Congregation of the Mission, St. Vincent de Paul laid the basis of a work that would transform the Church and society. He showed that the evangelization of the poor and the formation of the clergy were inseparable, and that charity was the most authentic expression of the gospel. His pastoral vision anticipated many concerns that the Church continues to value today, such as the preferential option for the poor and the need for a missionary church. While the congregation of the mission was being consolidated, St. Vincent de Paul perceived that it was necessary also to organize the participation of women in the work of charity. Many ladies of society, moved by Vincent's witness, wished to help the poor, but did not always have the conditions to dedicate themselves directly to those in need. On the other hand, there were simple women who had a deep desire to serve, but needed guidance. It was in this context that the idea arose to found a female community directed to charitable service. In 1633, together with Saint Louise de Marillac, Vincent founded the Daughters of Charity, a congregation of consecrated women who, unlike traditional orders, did not live in enclosure. This was a true novelty for the time, for most religious women remained cloistered in convents, dedicated to prayer. The Daughters of Charity, however, had as their mission to be in the midst of the poor, going into the streets, homes, and hospitals. This revolutionary characteristic made the congregation a milestone in the history of consecrated life. Vincent instructed the Daughters of Charity to see Christ in every poor person they assisted. He said that the poor are our lords and masters, highlighting that service should be done with humility, respect, and love. This spirituality transformed the way the religious related to those in need, seeing in them the presence of Jesus. This mystical vision gave deep meaning to their works and motivated a generous and persevering self-giving. The Daughters of Charity dedicated themselves to various fronts. They cared for orphans, visited the sick in their homes, attended to the poor in hospitals, and distributed food and clothing. They also founded schools for poor girls, promoting education as a means of human dignity. In all these services, they united material assistance with spiritual care, evangelizing while relieving the most urgent needs. One of the most notable works was the care of the orphans of Paris, who lived in miserable conditions. Many children were abandoned in the streets and were at risk of death. The Daughters of Charity, with Vincent's support, created houses of welcome, offering food, education, and affection. This initiative saved thousands of lives and deeply marked French society, which came to recognize the importance of organized charity. Besides the orphans, the Daughters of Charity dedicated themselves to hospitals, which at the time were places of abandonment and suffering. With dedication and love, they transformed the care of the sick, offering not only medical attention, but also spiritual comfort. Many times, they themselves cleaned wounds, fed the sick, and prayed at the side of the dying. This presence brought dignity and hope to those who suffered. Education was also a priority. Vincent believed that instruction was a powerful means of transforming the lives of the poor. Therefore, he encouraged the Daughters of Charity to found schools, especially for girls, who were often deprived of access to study. This initiative was innovative and opened new opportunities for thousands of young women, preparing them for a more dignified life and with greater possibilities of social inclusion. The growth of the congregation was rapid. In a short time, the Daughters of Charity were spread across various regions of France, multiplying their works of charity. They became a visible and active presence of the Church in the midst of the people, showing that consecrated life could have a missionary face and be close to those in need. This expansion also led to official recognition of the congregation by the Church, guaranteeing its continuity over the centuries. Vincent always insisted that the strength of the Daughters of Charity lay in the union between prayer and action. He said that it was not enough to serve the poor materially. It was also necessary to maintain a deep life of prayer, so that service would be an expression of God's love. This spirituality integrated contemplation and action, becoming one of the greatest legacies of the congregation. Thus, with the foundation of the Daughters of Charity, Saint Vincent de Paul expanded his work in an extraordinary way. He managed to unite men and women, lay people and consecrated persons in one and the same charism to serve Christ in the poor. This vision opened new horizons for the Church, showing that organized charity, when inspired by the gospel, is capable of transforming entire societies. To understand the greatness of Saint Vincent de Paul, it is necessary to place him in the historical context in which he lived. The 17th century was a turbulent period in France, marked by wars, economic crises, hunger, and epidemics. The people suffered under the oppression of taxes and widespread misery, while the nobility lived in luxury and indifference. In this scenario, Vincent's presence was like a light that broke through the darkness, offering hope to the most abandoned. France also experienced intense religious tensions. Although the country was predominantly Catholic, there were conflicts with Protestants and a church that needed internal reforms. Many priests did not have adequate formation, and the clergy in general was distant from the real needs of the people. Vincent's action was decisive in renewing the spirit of the priesthood, promoting popular missions, and restoring the vitality of faith in many communities. Another challenge of that time was the constant wars, especially the 30 Years' War, which devastated much of Europe. The peasants were the greatest victims, suffering from the destruction of crops, hunger, and violence. Vincent mobilized resources to help these populations, organizing the distribution of food and clothing. His network of charity reached not only Paris, but also the regions most affected by the war. Epidemics were another drama faced. Diseases such as the plague ravaged entire cities, causing thousands of deaths. Many abandoned the sick for fear of contagion. But Vincent and his communities did not draw back. Priests, sisters, and volunteers went to meet the sick, caring for them to the end. This testimony of courage and love showed the world the true face of the Church, a mother who does not abandon her children in moments of greatest pain. Vincent's work drew the attention not only of the people, but also of the authorities. He was called to advise kings and cardinals and took part in important councils for the reform of the clergy and ecclesial life. Despite his closeness to power, he always maintained humility, remembering that his principal mission was to serve the poor. This stance gave him great credibility, making him a respected mediator in times of crisis. Vincent also concerned himself with the galley slaves, that is, prisoners condemned to work on galleys, the warships moved by oars. These men lived in inhuman conditions, chained and treated with extreme cruelty. Vincent visited them, offered spiritual and material assistance, and sought to improve their conditions. This care showed his radical commitment to all those who suffered, even those considered criminals. In the field of education, Vincent dedicated himself to the formation not only of priests, but also of lay people. He encouraged the creation of schools and confraternities so that the faith could be transmitted clearly to future generations. He understood that religious ignorance was one of the greatest causes of spiritual misery, and therefore he invested with all his strength in catechesis and teaching. Vincent's spirituality was deeply rooted in the gospel. He saw in Christ, poor, humble, and servant, the model to be followed. For him, to serve the poor was to serve Christ himself. This theological vision sustained all his social action, showing that there was no separation between faith and charity, but that both were united in the same mission. This spirituality, simple yet profound, continues to inspire millions of people to this day. In the context of his time, Vincent was a true prophet. While many were concerned with honors and riches, he pointed to simplicity and service. His life was a testimony that it is possible to transform the world through charity lived with love. For this reason, even in life, he was recognized as a holy man, admired even by those who did not share his faith. Thus, in the midst of wars, epidemics, economic crises, and religious tensions, Saint Vincent de Paul shone like a flame of hope. He showed that even in times of darkness, the gospel can be lived in a radical and transformative way. His life is a permanent invitation not to conform ourselves to injustice, but to act with courage and love in favor of those most in need. Saint Vincent de Paul lived to the age of 79, an advanced age for his time, considering the hardships of the 17th century. To the end, he remained faithful to his mission, organizing works of charity, encouraging his congregations, and preaching the gospel with simplicity and vigor. Even weakened by age and illnesses, he did not cease to attend to the poor and to guide his disciples. His life was a continuous testimony of love and perseverance. On September 27, 1660, Vincent gave his soul to God in Paris. His death was received with great emotion, for he was already recognized as a father of the poor and a true apostle of charity. Thousands of people took part in his funeral rites, bearing witness to the gratitude they felt for all that he had done. His reputation for holiness spread quickly, and soon reports began to arise of graces and miracles attributed to his intercession. The process of Vincent's canonization was initiated shortly after his death. The Church recognized the greatness of his life and work, carefully examining his witness and the signs of holiness that he left. In 1737, Pope Clement V canonized him, officially declaring him a saint of the Catholic Church. This recognition confirmed what was already engraved in the hearts of the people. Vincent de Paul was a man of God, an example of charity and holiness. The legacy of Saint Vincent endures in the congregations and institutions he founded. The fathers of the mission and the daughters of charity remain present in various countries, carrying forward the charism of serving Christ in the poor. In addition, countless Vincentian associations have been created over the centuries, inspired by his example, such as the Society of Saint Vincent de Paul, founded in the 19th century by Antoine Frédéric Ozanam. This network of charity reaches millions of people around the whole world. Vincent's example also inspired the Church itself to strengthen its mission of charity. He showed that there is no true evangelization without concrete attention to the poor. This vision was taken up by many popes, including St. John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Francis, who emphasized the importance of living charity as an essential part of the Christian faith. In this sense, Saint Vincent is an ever-current saint who continues to teach the Church. Besides institutional works, Vincent's legacy lives in the heart of every Christian who feels called to serve those in need. His simple and practical spirituality inspires thousands of lay faithful to live charity in daily life, whether helping the poor in their communities or supporting missionary works. Thus, his charism crosses borders and is renewed in every new generation. The devotion to Saint Vincent de Paul spread throughout the world, and he became the patron of countless works of charity. His liturgical feast, celebrated on September 27th, is an opportunity to recall his life and renew the commitment to the poor. In many communities, this day is marked by acts of solidarity, the distribution of food, and activities on behalf of those in need, perpetuating Vincent's spirit. Vincent's figure also occupies a place of prominence in Catholic spirituality. He is remembered as the Father of Charity, the one who knew how to unite faith and action in an exemplary way. His life shows that holiness is not in extraordinary feats, but in daily fidelity to the gospel and in concrete love of neighbor. This teaching is an invitation for all of us, called to be missionary disciples of Christ. Vincent's death was not the end, but the beginning of a work that remains alive. His words, his institutions, and his example endure as a light for the Church. He teaches us that in the face of human misery, we cannot remain indifferent, but must act with compassion and creativity. His life is a concrete response to the commandment of love, which remains the heart of Christianity. Thus, we conclude this script remembering that Saint Vincent de Paul is one of the greatest witnesses of charity in the history of the Church. He knew how to transform his life, his experiences, and even his difficulties into instruments to serve Christ in the poor. His legacy remains alive, challenging each of us to make charity not merely an occasional gesture, but a permanent style of Christian life.